The sun rose slow over Miller Ridge, casting long shadows across the rough-cut fence line that had held back time for over a century. My boots hit the dirt like they belonged there because they did. This ranch wasn't just where I lived. It was where I was made. 5 generations of Millers had run cattle through these pastures, built barns with their bare hands, and buried kin on the hill under that lone cedar tree. My name's Jake Miller, and I'm the last one left. After Dad passed last fall, I'd been running the place solo. Long days. Hard nights. But I preferred the company of horses and Horizon to cocktail parties and HOA newsletters. Especially those newsletters. That's where trouble started, with a letterhead that didn't belong. Eagle View Estates Homeowners Association. An oxymoron if there ever was one. A gated community with synthetic lawns and imported stone facades had popped up just beyond my southern boundary 5 years ago.
I didn't think much of it then.
Let them have their wine tastings and noise complaints. I kept to my pastures, they kept to their playgrounds. Until she showed up. Karen Dempsey. She arrived uninvited, perched stiffly atop a painted mare she clearly didn't know how to ride. Her white riding pants clashed with the dust, and her pearl earrings sparkled like they had no idea they were out of place. Behind her rode a younger man, tall, chiseled, smug. Brandon. Her only son and, apparently, her greatest achievement. "I assume you're Mr. Miller," she said, voice clipped and chilly. "I am. And you're trespassing," I replied, arms crossed. "Oh, I'm simply visiting a neighbor," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to discuss your land's encroachment on Eagle View's piece." I blinked. "My land's what?" "The dust," she said, waving a gloved hand toward the horizon. "Your cattle trails stirred up. It's coating our homes, lowering our property values. And your old fencing is a safety hazard to children. My fence's been here since 1924. Before your subdivision had plumbing or people." Brandon let out a half-laugh. "Maybe it's time someone upgraded." I stepped forward, letting the silence stretch. The mare under Karen shifted uneasily. "Say your piece or ride on," I said. She pulled out a manila folder from her saddlebag and handed it to me like it was gospel. Inside were glossy maps, legal declarations, and something else, a proposal. "We believe the southern pasture, the one bordering our eastern walking path, should be reassigned for community use. My grandfather nearly bought it in 1952, but the sale fell through due to clerical oversight. There's ambiguity in the old county plats. Brandon has legal grounds to petition for partial claim." I stared at her. "You're saying your boy deserves a piece of my land because your grandfather almost bought it?" Karen gave a little shrug. "Intent is 9/10 of law these days." I handed the folder back without looking twice. "You and your boy can get off my property," I said, stepping closer.
"Now."
Brandon tensed, but Karen held her ground. "This doesn't need to be unpleasant. The HOA prefers cooperation. I don't answer to your HOA. I don't answer to anyone but the land and the law." Her smile returned thin, brittle. "Then you'll be hearing from our lawyer. Have the blessed day." They turned their horses around and trotted back toward the ridge. I watched until they disappeared between the mesquite and designer rooftops. Back at the barn, I laid the folder on Dad's old workbench. Legalese, maps, a typed-up community integration initiative, all dressed up to look legitimate. But this wasn't about dust or trails or fences. It was about control. Karen Dempsey had decided my ranch was an eyesore, a blemish on her pristine, planned community. And Brandon? He wasn't here for land. He was here for legacy.
Mine.
I lit a match and held it near the folder, but stopped. This wasn't a fire I could win with flames. They'd chosen paper.
Law.
Perception. So I'd fight them on their battlefield, and I'd win. But I knew this. No one walks onto Miller land and claims it like a prize. Especially not someone who thinks a deed matters more than a backbone. I closed the barn door and saddled my horse. They wanted a fight. They just didn't know I'd been raised for one. The first blow didn't come with fists or fences. It came through the mail. A week after Karen's visit, I found a glossy envelope resting in my mailbox, sandwiched between a tractor parts catalog and a sympathy card still arriving late for Dad. The envelope was monogrammed and perfumed. It reeked of entitlement before I even tore it open. Inside, a letter from a law firm in Austin. Gold embossed. Cold as ice. It began with pleasantries. "Dear Mr. Miller, on behalf of our client, Karen Dempsey," then slashed to the point. They were alleging potential ownership interest in my southern pasture based on a decades-old land plat and a contested clause in a county survey from 1952. According to them, Brandon Dempsey had inherited equitable claim rights through his late great-grandfather's documented purchasing intention. That's what they called it, intention. Not a deed. Not a title.
Just a historical maybe.
I read it twice, then threw it on the kitchen table beside a chipped coffee mug and a tin of .22 rounds. My dog, Buck, whined at the door, sensing my mood. I stepped out to clear my head, but my fists were already clenched. The next few days came in waves. First a call from the county clerk, cautious but concerned. "Jake, this Dempsey lawyer's been sniffing around the deed archives. I thought you ought to know." Then came a visit from the sheriff, Tom Rayburn, who I'd played football with in high school. "They're filing for an emergency injunction," he said, removing his hat. "They want a temporary hold on any livestock grazing near the Eagle View boundary until the ownership dispute's resolved." Dispute. I spat. There is no dispute. There's just fiction and a desperate family with too much time and not enough land. Tom nodded slowly. "I believe you. But the judge has to treat it like it's real. At least until it's disproven." I felt the pressure starting to coil inside me, tight, hot, ancient. But it didn't end there. One afternoon, I caught Brandon parked just beyond the south fence, his Range Rover angled like it was surveying a construction site. I rode down to meet him, not bothering with a smile. "Something you need, Brandon?" He didn't even pretend to be polite. "Just taking a look at what's soon to be mine. HOA's already discussing plans for a community greenbelt. Trail access. Maybe a gazebo. Over my dead body." "That was the idea," he said, smirking. "Look, Jake. This whole cowboy thing? It's over. You're a relic. My mom's just speeding up the process." I dismounted, closed the gap between us, and said nothing, just stared until the smirk melted into a scowl. He got back in his SUV and peeled out, kicking gravel into the pasture. The next morning, I found the gate chain cut clean through. My cattle had wandered. Nothing dangerous, but enough to cost me half a day of hard riding and worry. I installed new locks, reinforced the posts. That night, I sat on the porch with Buck at my side and a rifle across my lap, not because I was afraid, but because I knew where this road led. Karen had no claim, no right, but she had resources. And in this country, money could bend truth like wire. I needed backup. So I called Lucy, my cousin, sharp as a branding iron, and head of the county library archives. "Think you can help me dig up anything on the 1952 plat disputes?" I asked. "I'm already on it," she said. Karen's lawyer's been in and out of the archive room for days. They're trying to reframe an old rumor as law. If they're rewriting history, I want the original draft. "You'll have it," she promised. That gave me hope, but only for a moment. 2 days later, I received another letter. This one came with an official county seal. Temporary injunction granted. I was legally barred from using my southern pasture until the court hearing in 3 weeks. They'd taken my land without ever setting foot on it. I stood at the edge of the property that night, lanterns swinging in the wind, and stared into the darkened field. This was no longer about a pasture. It was about erasure of legacy, identity, bloodline. Karen thought she could bully me off the land I was born on. Thought she could slap enough legal gloss on a lie to make it stick. She didn't know me. She didn't know this land. And she sure as hell didn't know how far Miller would go to protect what was his. 3 weeks later, I stood outside the county courthouse in boots polished from pride, not vanity. The courtroom was packed tighter than the feed barn in winter. Neighbors, reporters, HOA board members in neatly pressed polos. Karen sat near the front in a crisp beige suit, hair perfectly coiffed, lips pursed like she was already halfway to victory. Brandon lounged beside her, whispering to a young attorney with gelled hair and a smug tie. I didn't bring a lawyer. I brought Lucy. She rolled in with a cardboard box labeled Miller Ranch, Deeds and Disputes, 1890 to 1983. Her boots were dusty, her eyes sharp. She set the box down like a brick of truth, then shot me a nod. Let's show them what history really says, she muttered. The judge, an old rancher's son named Holloway, called the room to order. Karen's lawyer began with flair, painting a portrait of a noble family wronged by history. The Dempsey lineage nearly secured this land in 1952, he said, waving a copy of an old letter. It was only through a filing error that the transaction was lost. We contend that this oversight grants Brandon Dempsey a claim rooted in intention and family legacy. I almost laughed. They were trying to use legacy against me. Then Lucy stepped up, binder in hand. Your Honor, she said, voice even. This letter they're referencing was attached to a rejected purchase proposal. The owner at the time, Harlan Miller, declined the offer, citing his desire to keep the land in the family. She flipped to a notarized document and held it high. And here's that very rejection, dated and signed. This land was never for sale. The Dempseys never owned it. There's no ambiguity. A murmur swept the room. Karen's lawyer objected, claimed forgery, desperation. Holloway overruled. Then came the kicker. Lucy held up a faded photograph. My great-grandfather, Harlan, standing with the county surveyor beside the very fence the Dempseys claimed was misaligned. Your Honor, the original survey marker is still on site. We dug it up yesterday. Still intact, still registered. Photographs and soil samples included, I added, sliding a folder across the table. Karen's lawyer faltered. Brandon flushed red. Karen, though, she didn't blink. She rose. If legacy is what this court values, then I'd like to speak.
My family deserves that land.
Brandon has ambitions. He plans to build a therapeutic writing center, one that will benefit the whole community. Is this court really going to choose an aging cattleman over progress? She turned to me. You're clinging to the past, Jake. What have you done with the land besides let it decay? I stood slowly. I've done what 5 generations before me did. Worked it, respected it, and protected it. I turned to the judge. I've buried my father on that hill. I've ridden fence lines in sleet and drought. That land doesn't need monuments or gazebos. It needs honor. And Karen, she doesn't want to build anything. She wants to erase everything that doesn't fit her world. Holloway leaned forward. This court isn't here to debate vision. It's here to rule on law. He looked through the documents, tapped his gavel once. Claim dismissed. Injunction lifted. The land remains the property of Jake Miller. Silence. Then, a few scattered claps. One of my neighbors let out a soft, "That's right." Karen's face froze. Brandon stood, fists clenched. You'll regret this, he said, eyes locked on me. You think this is over? I didn't reply. Because it wasn't over. Not really. A week passed. Things quieted. But not for long. One morning, I found tire tracks gouged deep into my southern pasture. My fence had been cut again. One calf was missing. Another limped from a wound I didn't like the look of. This wasn't harassment. This was sabotage. I filed a report, had the sheriff out. Tom took photos, shook his head. You think it's them? I know it is. But there was no proof, just a trail of bruised earth and bruised pride. That night, I made my rounds early, then climbed the hill to Dad's grave. The wind whipped through the grass like whispered warning. I won in court, Pop, I said, voice low. But something tells me this war's just heating up. The stars blinked above, silent and steady. I turned toward the barn, Buck padding behind me. Let them come, I thought. Let them throw everything they have. Because I wasn't just guarding a ranch. I was guarding a bloodline, and I wasn't done fighting. It happened just after dawn, 2 weeks after the hearing. I woke to Buck barking like the barn was on fire. When I threw open the front door, I saw it. Smoke curling above the southern pasture, thick and black, staining the sky. I didn't even grab a coat. I bolted down the porch steps and jumped in my truck. The drive was rough and fast, tires skidding over gravel as I flew down the hill. By the time I reached the pasture, the eastern fence line was in flames. The dry winter grass had caught like tinder.
Somebody had set this.
I fought the fire with everything I had: shovels, water barrels, a tractor line plowed straight through the growth to stop the spread. Neighbors showed up with hoses and grit. Sheriff Rayburn came too, but his hands were tied. No witnesses. No cameras. No prints. I knew who it was. Karen and Brandon had lost in court, but they weren't done trying to scorch me off my own land. This was a message. Problem was, they thought I only had one way to fight. They thought wrong. Later that evening, after the fire was doused and the smoke had thinned, I called Lucy again. You still have access to the HOA records? Every file Karen ever touched.
Why?
Because I'm done playing defense. By week's end, we had enough to flip the war. Karen had been using HOA funds to pay for her legal campaign. Illegally. Worse, she'd funneled contracts to Brandon, maintenance deals, landscaping budgets, and a community vision project that billed over $20,000 for a single PowerPoint deck. Lucy cross-referenced it all. I built a packet and drove it straight to the county oversight board, then handed another copy to the local paper. They ran the headline in bold: HOA president under fire for corruption, nepotism. It hit the community like a dropped hay bale. By Monday, Karen had stepped down pending review. Brandon vanished from the HOA website entirely. A special audit was called, and neighbors, most of whom had stayed quiet before, now spoke up. Turns out, I wasn't the only one she'd try to push around. But I'd been the only one who pushed back and had proof. Still, I wasn't celebrating yet. Not until I made sure this couldn't happen again. I called a town meeting in the old school gym. Not a fancy event, just coffee, folding chairs, and truth. I stood at the front, hat in hand, and laid it all out. The land theft, the court battle, the sabotage. I don't care if you're new here or your family's been here 100 years, I said. This land doesn't belong to ambition or entitlement. It belongs to truth. And it's time we held our HOA to the same standard we expect from our neighbors. Applause followed. Not loud, but real. That night, they voted me onto the HOA board. The same board that once tried to erase me. It wasn't revenge. It was balance. Karen left town shortly after. Word was she moved to Florida, bought into a gated golf community with someone else's money. Brandon? Last I heard, he was managing a strip mall 2 counties over. But their legacy didn't vanish quietly. It left scars, burned grass, busted fences, cattle that still spooked at shadows. I repaired every post myself, reseeded the pasture, built a new fire break lined with mesquite. And I added something else.
A sign.
Just beyond the main gate, carved from old barnwood, painted bold. Miller Ranch, EST 1890. Private land, blood bought, court defended. Some folks said it was dramatic. I said it was earned. One evening, months later, I found myself back on that southern hill, Buck stretched out beside me, the sun bleeding orange across the sky. The land was quiet again, save for the wind and the distant chirp of cicadas. And it hit me what Karen never understood. This ranch wasn't just lines on a map. It was memory, struggle,
Story.
It was family. They tried to rewrite that story with money, threats, and fire. But I wrote the ending with truth, grit, and a bloodline too deep to uproot. So let them come with lawyers and letters. Let them think they can own what they don't understand. Because some things like this ranch, like my name, aren't for sale. And never will be.